Yes, we went off to Macau. But again, a thing that's maybe hard for people to understand is even in that place, which was a school, one of the teachers refused to teach us because we weren't Chinese. So we never could do clinic with her. She would not interact with us in classes. Going to the principal, who happened to be her husband, to try and get this worked out, was we didn't fail her classes. It was tough.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. Acupuncture is weird. Partly objective, partly subjective. Get too far to the edges on either end, and you lose some of the potency. I've tried for a long time to normalize it. Squeeze acupuncture into the box of the rational. Dress it up with the scientific method and salt it with my, no doubt, extremely cherry-picked understanding of quantum physics. It never quite fit neatly into the categories and flowchart boxes in the basics books that I had in school. It rhymed with it, sure, but like a family secret, there was something that didn't quite fit. It's taken me a long time to realize that acupuncture, while systemic, it's not wholly objective. There's room for the pieces that don't fit, room for contradictions and subjectivity as well. And that, perhaps, has been the most challenging part to include. Subjectivity. It goes so against the grain of what I was taught science was. And who in our modern time doesn't want to follow the science? In typical yang flipping into yin, the true scientist rarely trades in certainties, but rather keeps an achingly open, inquiring mind, because science requires the possibility that you might be wrong. And with enough data and understanding, long-held paradigms, they can crumble, but usually not without a fight. I know that fight because it's a fight that I have in my own mind, which is why I've attempted to cajole acupuncture into something my left brain could take to a cocktail party and make it not sound weird. But as of late, I've given up on that. I'm now fine with it being strange, not unlike getting on good terms with an eccentric relative, because the world can be perfectly fine when it's weird, and usually more interesting to boot. Now I let acupuncture be what it wants to be. I listen more to it rather than attempt to comb its hair nicely and dress it up for polite company. And here's the other piece that I finally gained some comfort with. Medicine, while it is a serious business and all too often solemn in the face of blood chemistry, PET scans, or the ravages of aging, at the same time, medicine, it's full of discovery, joy, connection, and, dare I say, love. Acupuncture, it is weird. And I don't think that's a bug. It's a feature. As a big-nosed foreigner living in Chinese culture, it's weird, especially in the 70s, before the Western influence had worked its way into Taiwanese culture, and studying Chinese medicine, stranger yet, especially when you're not looking to academically understand it, but rather studying it so as to learn to use it. While acupuncture was just beginning to find its way into the counterculture of the West, Dan Bensky was living in the traditional Chinese culture of Taiwan, and unlike the curriculum of a modern-day acupuncture school, his learning was anything but straightforward. I think you will enjoy this conversation on Dan's sojourn in Asia and the kind of discernment that he needed to develop to understand if his teachers were helping him to learn the medicine or putting obstructions into his path. We'll get into all this and more in a moment. Stay with us. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out the new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lyle, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AccuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AccuFastNeedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Welcome to Shop Talk. In this portion of the podcast, we are bringing you roughly 15 minutes of practical, clinical methods, perspectives, and advice that has its work boots on. This section is all about practical material that you can begin to investigate the next time that you walk into clinic. Additionally, visit the show notes page for supporting materials from this week's guest on Shop Talk. All right, roll up your sleeves. Let's get to work.
Hello, this is Jason Robertson coming to you from Seattle, Washington. And what a pleasure it is to have a few minutes here with you guys on the Shop Talk segment of Qiological to talk about palpating the head, to talk about locating certain points on the head, specifically dew points, dew 19 and dew 21, are what I'd like to talk about here eventually. How to locate these guys, how to think about palpated findings in this area, and some ideas about how to treat these points. And of course, I'm drawing, as I always do, from the extensive clinical experience of my teacher, Beijing professor Wang Juyi. And he and I worked on a textbook together, Applied Channel Theory in Chinese Medicine. And we've, those of us who are his disciples and students have been teaching for years concepts of using distal channel palpation, specifically below the elbows and knees, as a means of kind of helping shape your diagnosis, just like you would with tongue and pulse, and using channel palpation as a diagnostic tool. One thing that we maybe haven't had as much of a chance to talk about, and that's why I wanted to choose this subject today, was how Dr. Wang palpated the head and how he kind of analyzed a little bit, palpated findings on the head, and how you might think about using head points a little bit creatively yourself in your clinic. One thing to say at the outset is, Dr. Wang's approach to locating points was shaped by his understanding of this term you see in the Neijing. The character is jie in Chinese, which is sometimes translated to English as a joint, but it's also more like a separation or an opening, and jie are not just bony joints. In other words, there are separation and openings throughout the body. And so, one of Dr. Wang's fundamental concepts about point location was that for locating any point, you're looking for some sort of unique anatomical jie, some sort of anatomical joint. That could be a joint within the skin. It could be a joint, of course, between bones, or it could even be joints within bones, little notches you can feel in bones, or maybe bifurcations of blood vessels that are a certain, that would be called that a maijie, like a blood vessel joint. And there's all these different kind of anatomical and palpable aspects of the body near the official point locations that will help you refine and kind of get further into the best place to put the needle. Specifically on the head, what Dr. Wang would say when looking for these head points, when you look at the maps of the head points from your acupuncture textbooks, they're, very logically laid out as this many tun separated from that point and this many tun from the other. But any of you put your hands on people's heads, and I'm sure many of you have in your clinical work, you've noticed that heads are shaped differently. There's different muscle structure of the heads, the way the bones come together, the way the cranial sutures feel on different people's heads are different. And so taking this idea of always looking for the anatomical space when locating points onto the head, certainly when you're thinking about the lateral head points, maybe the gallbladder and sanjiao channel on the sides of the heads, then what you're often feeling for is little divots almost between muscle attachments. Those are kind of little, what he would call, like rojia, spaces between the attachments of the flesh you can feel. So the head points kind of float a bit. And so you use those point location maps we see in the textbooks as a starting place, and then you put your hands on the patient and look for the kind of the palpable separations that you can feel at the points. And they're often, yes, they're tender, so they feel different to you and the patient. But getting to the dew vessel, and these are the 2 points I really want to talk about in particular, as I said earlier, dew 19, Hoding, and dew 21, Chanding. Those are the points that are essentially on either side of the more famous, probably dew 20. I'm sure many of you have located and talked about and used in your own clinical work. Dr. Wang loved dew 19 and dew 21. So first, let's talk just a moment about, how he, his strategy for locating these points. And then, of course, we know that officially you have dew 20, which is thought of as being 5 tun, posterior to the anterior hairline, or 7 up from the posterior hairline. And of course, many people don't have hair, and hair is different, so that's problematic. And often we locate dew 20 instead by going from the line drawn from the earlobe to the apex of the ear and going to the top of the head. Maybe as you're listening, find dew 20 on yourself. It's that kind of top of the head vertex point that many of us know and use and love, of course. And then in front of that, officially 1.5 tun in front, you have dew 21, Chanding, and 1.5 tun behind that, you have dew 19. So how did Dr. Wang find these points, and how did he think about using these points? So first, about finding. When he would describe the location of dew 19, he would talk about first finding the external occipital protuberance, that bump on the back of your head, on those occipital bones where they come together. There's that protuberance, and then going Directly below that, we know that's do 16, and officially then do 17, 18, and 19 are divided into quarters on the way to do 20. So then you would say that do 17 is 1/4 of the way up between 16 and 20. Do 18 is halfway between do 16 and do 20, and then do 19 is 3/4 of the way between do 16 and do 20, and that's one way to locate those. And what Dr. Wong found, and you can see me alluding to this as I'm talking about it earlier, is that people's heads are different. So you got to find different ways to find these points. And so he would say that first find that protuberance and then palpate upward, and of course, you're going along the suture there between the two occipital bones, and you're palpating up in this area, and you'll feel a little divot, roughly a 1, 2, and up. That first divot or notch you find, that's do 17. And then as you palpate further up, you'll feel another divot in those occipital, the intersection of the occipital bones, and that would be do 18. And then do 19 is a really fascinating and actually pretty precisely located point because it's an intersection of two sutures. So if you take a look at an anatomy book, you see the occipital bones there on the back of the head, the parietal bones on the side, and intersecting the occipital and parietal bones, you have this lambdoid suture, which comes up from the mastoid process. You can kind of trace that up like a little triangle, and it intersects with the sagittal sutures that are between the two parietal bones. That interesting anatomical intersection between the lambdoid and sagittal sutures, that is where do 19 is located. So it's this really interesting cranial suture location, and there is very often interesting palpable change in this point do 19. So Dr. Wong told a story about how he started using do 19 in the treatment of a difficult stroke patient who was having a pain in their foot, and he was having trouble, didn't know what to do, and started palpating around on the head and found at do 19 an extreme tenderness. And when he pressed this point, it immediately relieved the foot pain, and he became, this was probably in the 1970s and 80s, and he became very interested in this point. And over time, he found that not only can this point, the classics describe do 19 as often being used for neck pain and dizziness, but what he particularly liked to use do 19 for was for issues along the do vessel and we'd say the collaterals, the luo of the do vessel, which we often think of as the jiaji line, or the Taiyang channel, the bladder channel in the back, and sometimes the Shaoyin channel affecting back pain. So this is actually a really interesting point that he would often use for low back pain patients. And often what you'd find is a palpable tenderness at this point, in this intersection point. And when he would find that, he would use a 1.5 twin needle, maybe inserting a little bit superior to the location of do 19, and threading that needle subcutaneously into this area. And he had a technique that he called a rubbing technique. He likened it to like rubbing like a piece of fur on a glass rod to create static electricity. So once the needle was inserted, he would press down and do a rubbing technique while having the patient sit erectly, having the patient kind of cough, which is often nerve-wracking for someone with an acute back sprain, and then having them move while stimulating this point. And it's really interesting how you can often get an immediate change with this fairly strong stimulation of this technique while mobilizing the patient's back. So we'd often treat it in a seated position. There's a little more detail to that technique, which is, of course, difficult to fully describe here in a few minutes on a podcast. But start palpating this area on patients with issues with their lumbar vertebra, maybe the paraspinal muscles that affect the do vessel and the Taiyang channel in the back. When they're out of place, try stimulating this point, locating it in the way I'm describing in these sutures, and having them move around and see if you can, while stimulating the point, get some relief in that pain. It's often very useful for the type of patient who comes into the clinic and is, you can't even get them on the table because their back is so out of place. And again, especially when it's affecting the Taiyang and the do vessels, not as much the Shaoyang gallbladder channel type of sciatica pain. This is more of a medial pain, maybe going down the back of the legs, or acute pain in the back itself, or maybe in the neck as well. Any of these aligning ligaments and muscles along the back can be treated and thought of using do 19. Now, for the next couple of minutes, let's kind of keep moving forward. As you go forward from do 20, a 1.5 twin in front of that is another really fascinating point, do 21, Chanding. This point has another totally different kind of personality. And this point often, if you palpate this on people, it can be very tender and almost squishy feeling. Like there's a little bit of microedema in the fluids there between the skin, the scalp and the bones of the head. This point is, of course, also within that sagittal suture, not all the way in front, and the coronal suture way up in front of that. That's Du 22, Xin Hui. It's kind of between that and Du 20, Du 20, of course, and right in that midpoint between that coronal suture and Du 20, you'll find, and it's kind of a little bit of a floater of a point, you'll find this tender spot, Du 21. And this point has an interesting personality in that it often reflects a lack of clear yang coming to the head. Dr. Wong talked about qing yang, clear yang coming to the head. And this could be a patient maybe with kind of a fuzzy thinking, almost like water in the head. Maybe even certain patients who have like a lingering sinus infection where there's like a clear discharge, not a green discharge. So it's like a lack of yang transforming fluids in the head. If you can imagine all the symptoms, maybe dizziness, that come from this lack of clarity of yang. And he would describe that type of yang often as coming from a warmth in the middle burner. So a lot of time, maybe these patients have like a spleen deficient personality. You may palpate their abdomen and it's a little cold around Ren 12. And yet they have this lack of clear yang coming to the head, kind of a dizziness, a fuzziness of thinking, fluid accumulations in the head or sinuses. And Du 21 can be very tender. So this point, you might even, I would often use Du 21 first diagnostically to think about the lack of clear yang, and then you need to do a differential diagnosis to think about why clear yang isn't coming to the head. Maybe it's a deficiency of the Taiwan system not sending fluids up. Of course, that could be a kidney deficiency, maybe. Maybe on the other hand, there's like an excess below that is not allowing yang to come up. So the mechanisms of why Du 21 is tender can vary, and that's where you need to palpate other channels, use tongue, use pulse and questions, and use other differential diagnosis. But this point gives you a way of thinking that we need to facilitate a raising of clear yang in this patient. Maybe in some cases you might do moxibustion at Ren 12 to warm the middle burner so it percolates fluids up. Maybe in some cases you might need to descend like stasis and yang ming by using points like stomach 37 and stomach 39 together to descend that turbidity so that yang rises back up. Maybe it is a kidney deficient patient and you maybe would be using moxa at Ren 6 or at Du 4 or tonifying yang herb formulas or something. You have to be a little bit creative about interpreting this, but you will certainly find it is interestingly reflective through palpation of some sort of, it's often a squishiness you'll feel in this case when there's a lack of clear yang coming upwards. So that's just 2 points, Du 19, Du 21. The big idea, as I started to say at the beginning here, is when you're looking for points on the head, use those twin measurements that we learn in acupuncture school as a starting place, but then put your hands on the patient and feel on this patient the anatomical structures and look for the palpable jie, the palpable openings, the palpable spaces between muscles or within bones or between bones, and find the points creatively a little bit and needle them often subcutaneously. And go deeper into head points. There's a lot to say here about using them diagnostically and in treatment. So that's the main thing I wanted to say. For anyone who's interested in learning more about applied channel theory, the other apprentices and I of Dr. Wang Jui, we have a podcast of our own called Dialogues in Applied Channel Theory. And that podcast, we've been doing it for a couple of years. We kind of are intermittent when we put them up, but there's a bunch of episodes there where we're discussing a variety of cases and a variety of concepts related to Dr. Wang Juyi's work. You can find that on anywhere you get your podcast. And also, if anyone is hearing this right now in September of 2023, I have an upcoming course I'm going to be teaching in Chicago. It'll be an introductory course on channel palpation. We have NCCAOM credits for that. And if you're interested in attending that course, it's going to be coming up here in September 16th and 17th, 2023 in Chicago. Just type in your web browser, Applied Channel Theory and Eventbrite. You can find it in Eventbrite, and you'll see the sign-up information there. I hope to see a few of you in Chicago or somewhere else. We also have a website, of course, channelpalpation.org, where you'll see other courses and a bunch of free downloadable material under the media tab, channelpalpation.org. And thank you to Qiological, as usual, for providing so many interesting discussions that all of us around the world are enjoying. Donate to Qiological, become a supporter. I am, and this is just a great resource for all of us. All right. Thank you very much. Put your hands on the head. Bye.
Dan Bensky, welcome back to Qiological.
Always a pleasure.
Always a delight. Yeah, I love hanging out with you. And today, we're doing a history series on how acupuncture found its way into mainstream culture here in the West. When I came along to go to acupuncture school, when I decided maybe I want a career change, I had the great good privilege of being able to look at acupuncture as a viable profession, a viable career, something to do. It was established. I could get a license. I could go to accredited school. Well, I could go to accredited school. Turns out I went to one that was not accredited, but they eventually got accredited because it was new. And, basically there was a profession that I could walk into, but it wasn't always that way. It's a fairly new thing to have acupuncture as a licensed profession here in the West. And you have been a part of the, I guess we could say, unfolding of that profession. You were here kind of in the beginning, before you probably knew there was a beginning. So I'd like to start with, when did you first hear about acupuncture? When did it come into your awareness? What year was that? And what was going on in the world around that time?
Everything about me is slightly off, but so I was 1972. Probably the first time I heard about acupuncture was when the vast majority of Americans first heard about acupuncture, was when a reporter for the New York Times, who was accompanying Nixon and Kissinger, had to have an appendectomy in Beijing, I believe, and had some form of acupuncture analgesia, acupuncture anesthesia it was called. And that's the first time I heard of it. And that must have been before, that must have been maybe around that time, 71, maybe. Anyway, I was in Taiwan in 72, and, I got very, very sick. I guess in the end, fortunately for me, very, very fortunately for me, was some kind of infection that did not respond to Western medicine. So I had gotten treatment of, I don't know exactly what, from a Chinese practitioner of Western medicine. And then I didn't get better, and I had a big antibiotic injection from a Canadian MD who was a missionary in Taiwan. And that didn't help. And then later I got introduced to someone doing Chinese herbs, and that worked very well for me. So that's how I got interested to begin with. And then I heard about acupuncture, which, was not, I would say at that time, was not really that big a deal in Taiwan either, but it did exist. It was legal. And so that's how I first heard about it and had my first interactions with people doing acupuncture.
Yeah. What are you doing in Taiwan in 1972?
Trying to learn Chinese. So I had gone to school in the University of Michigan in 1970, starting in 70. And I said, let's be kind and say I'm not the world's best student of languages, or I don't have a talent for languages. And I did okay, but not very well. And so if I was going to actually learn it, I had to do immersion. And in those days, the only place, and I would say probably today, still the best place to study Chinese is Taiwan. So I went there. I didn't know anybody. I just went, hooked up with a program at the National Taiwan Normal University. And that's what happened.
What a great name for a school, National Taiwan Normal University.
I used to joke, well, somehow I slipped it anyway, despite the name. But normal universities, I don't know why this is, but normal universities, normal is the word for teaching, schools for teachers to teach primary and secondary school teachers. So what the story is of that name, I do not know.
I don't know. Teachers are, primary and secondary school, they're trying to normalize you. Maybe that. I don't know either. So, all right, a couple courses of antibiotics. That didn't help. Well, Chinese herbs, what were you thinking at that moment in time? Like, okay, this didn't work. I'm in this foreign country. It's not a modern country at this point. Like, what the heck, Dan Bensky?
Yeah, well, I mean, my memory, my thought was when my, first of all, I believe it was my landlady, and she had to convince me, like, it was like, she had, the word is zhongyi, I didn't know what that meant, Chinese medicine, and then like, I thought it was some kind of folk medicine, and I was resistant because, I was like sick. I don't need folk medicine. I need real medicine. And then I had nothing, but I tried that. That hadn't worked. I was really quite ill. I had fluctuating fevers up to 104. I had lost a tremendous amount of weight. I was coughing up stuff that looked like came from a bad science fiction movie. So I decided I had to try something. And again, it's a long story. It was the whole atmosphere, in those days in Taiwan, pretty much you want to get herbs, you went to an herb shop, and then the guy who was the pharmacist would also be the doctor. And I believe there was no fee for any consultation, but you had to buy the herbs there. And it's a long story. It's too long maybe for this thing, but it was, I would say, if there were any placebo effects, they were all negative placebo. Like the store was dirty. They had like, walrus penises and seahorses, and the guy was, hadn't put his shirt on correctly, and, all sorts of stuff like that. I remember again, all this stuff is quite ironic in retrospect, but he took my pulse for quite a while. And that's 1972, so I am 19 years old. And I kept thinking, well, maybe I should just lend him my watch. I'm thinking he's like trying to count how fast my pulse is, and he kept losing track. And he asked me some off-the-wall question. He didn't ask me anything about why I was there, just some about my digestion. And he gave me what I looked like yard waste to me. It had that sound to it. It had like insects and baked plums and grass and bark, all that. I went back home. I was exhausted from the experience and went back to sleep. When I woke up, there was this, herbal decoction by my bed. Again, I remember very clearly thinking, this looks and smells like the river Styx. Like you would have to be one desperate son of a bitch to drink this shit. And well,
that's me.
That's me. And I drank it, and I woke up. I felt a little bit better, and I believe he gave me 3 packets. And at the end of the 3 packets, except for being somewhat tired, I felt fine. So that's how I got interested.
What was that like to find yourself, hey, I'm okay now? I mean, what did that do to your sense of the world? The way that you made, especially with things like science and medicine, because, like you're saying, you were one sick puppy. You don't need some damn folk medicine. Now you're drinking this stuff and you're like, okay.
Well, it was that journey took a lot longer. My initial thought was like, again, I think like most people saw at the time, was like, oh, there must be some interesting ingredients in here. And, we can scientifically, I had a long term, since I was 11 or 12, interest in Chinese philosophy. But it wasn't like, oh, this is it was not like, oh, this is a philosophy come to life. This is great. It was more like, oh, this is interesting stuff. If I study it, maybe we can figure out what, again, typical Westerner. We can figure out what it really is. Anyway, so yeah, it did not. It didn't really. It was. I think that was just the first step. Like, oh, okay. And for me, it was like I like Chinese very, very much. It doesn't like me quite so much. So this will give me a chance to do something useful. I didn't. It wasn't. It was just that.
It wasn't life-changing.
It was life-changing that it set the course for the rest of my life. But it wasn't like a with a spiritual experience or like, oh, now I see my life laid out before me.
Yeah. I'm going to go do this.
Yeah, and then it's like, okay, this sounds interesting. I like this. Maybe I could use Chinese to help people. That would be super cool. That's probably the extent of it. I had no idea what I was in for. That's for damn sure. So it was more like, okay, this makes sense, so that's it. There wasn't anything grandiose in any way.
I had no idea what I was in for.
Yeah. So for example, again, versus when you were, it wasn't like, okay, well, I want to study it, so I'll find a school and finding a place to study was very, very difficult. And much to my great luck, I think. So, I mean, there was a school in Taichung, but it wasn't fully operational as a Chinese medicine school. So, for example, later when we got very serious, we had certain criteria for the school and who we is, and I'll explain who we is in just a minute. One of the criteria is that had to have its own curriculum, to be a school. It had to have its own textbooks. It didn't matter what those textbooks were, but it had to have a series of textbooks. And it had to have clinic that was associated with the school. Because lots of they had like night programs, they would teach you the fundamentals. Then you would have to find some clinic in which to practice it, to learn from. Yeah, and that was not going to happen for us because we had tried. I mean, again, personally, I went to over 100 places in Taiwan trying to find someone to teach me.
That's knocking on a lot of doors and getting a lot of damn rejection.
Oh, yeah. Rejection is, it's one way of putting it. The other thing, Michael, which you have to, it's hard for people to really get now is I knew that I didn't know anything. And I mean, not know anything to the point of I had no real way which I was comfortable in deciding this is a good program or not program, right? Because I'm a Westerner, right? I was not less than normal brightness Westerner.
Yes, 19 years old, that doesn't help either.
So like if someone tells me how to do something in the beginning, the very beginning of the thing, it makes sense to me. Well, maybe that means it's wrong because it makes sense to me. And, we had a lot, and again, in this process, I met a couple other guys, one which was Ted Kapchuk, who was also happened to be in Taiwan. He must have got there just a little bit after me. And he had been, if you were interested in acupuncture outside of Taiwan and you wanted to study in Taiwan, they sent you to someone, I believe his name was Wu Wei Ping, who was a terrible acupuncturist, actually, but he had connections with the military and the government. And Ted had been sent to study with him. And Ted is a very, very clever person, very smart person. And he figured out very quickly that this guy was full of shit, basically, and managed to not only get out of the contract he had signed with him to study, but got his money back. And that's an amazing feat. So anyway, I met him at a meditation. There's a weekly meditation thing on Sundays that I ended up going to, and I met him there. And we were the two Westerners looking to study Chinese medicine in Taiwan. So we did a lot of some of the stuff together. And, so people would tell you things like, oh, well, you need to come work with me sweep my floors, and they'll cook for me and do all that stuff for 2 or 3 years, and then I'll teach you the I Ching for 2 or 3 years, and then I'll teach you the medicine. And oh, by the way, for the privilege of doing it, you need to pay me $6,000 US upfront. So those were simple because, like, well, I can't do that, right? I mean, whether it was made sense or not was unclear, but it was like, I don't have, that's like, I don't know what $6,000 and that 2023 money is, but it's like, must be at least $20,000. Like, that was a joke. And again, I have to be honest, I learned that sometimes people would tell you outrageous things, like maybe something like that, not because they wanted you to pay them the $6,000, because they just wanted you to go away and not be in the position where, oh, I told you to get lost, right? It's like, oh, you decided you didn't want to study with me. Well, that's your decision, right? That's, that thing. That's a very common way, which, things get, the swins of Bingfis permeated in many different aspects of East Asian culture. So I can't tell you whether they were hoping I would pay them the money, but then all people would just laugh at you, or people would, I think, pretend they couldn't understand you, and all sorts of different things. So anyway, after a while, at that time, the school in Taichung did not have its own clinic. Now I think it's a very excellent school, but this is almost 50 years ago. And so we kept doing things, and then Ted went to Hong Kong, and he found a school in Macau, because most of the schools in Hong Kong did not have their own clinic. And a lot of them were either just herbs or just acupuncture. And we had decided that, well, we're going to spend all the time learning this. We'd like to learn both. And the school in Macau, which is, I can give you the story, but actually it checked all the boxes. So it had its own clinic.
So off to Macau.
Yeah, so it went off to Macau. But again, a thing that's maybe hard for people to understand is, even in that place, which was a school, one of the teachers refused to teach us because we weren't Chinese. So we never could do clinic with her. She would not interact with us in classes. So, and again, with going to the principal, who happened to be her husband, to try and get this worked out, was we didn't fail her classes, but so it was tough. And of course, the other thing, of course, that's tough for us is it's all in Chinese, of course, everything in Chinese. And then I guess one thing I remember had many things had a huge impression on me was most of the other people in our school. The school was small, probably 20 students, maybe it just started, were people who were the daughters or sons of people who did Chinese medicine. And of course, they were all people who were interested in Chinese medicine, otherwise they wouldn't be in school.
And they had a head start.
And so I remember, we're reading about dampness, like, what the hell is that? Right? And it's like, what do you mean, what the hell is that? It's dampness. Hey. So, they didn't, from working with me, that I have this thought that in some aspects, not all, but some aspects of East Asian medicine, precision and accuracy are mutually exclusive. That the more precise you are talking about something, the less you actually get it. And I think I got that idea. It's just one, other people have different ideas, but from this kind of thing, for me, trying to, okay, I'm going to be able to write, dampness is these 5 or 6 things, right? I'm going to have a very precise definition of dampness. And, it's just like, you're not as smart as you look, and you don't even look very smart to begin with. So that was interesting. And again, there's other language issues at the time. So all of our teachers were people who were overseas Chinese from, I think they were mostly from Indonesia. Some were maybe from Cambodia, South Vietnam, maybe not South Vietnam, who had gone to study Chinese medicine in China before the Cultural Revolution and had just gotten out. So one of the advantages and disadvantages in our school, or they were Cantonese speakers. They were native speakers of Cantonese from Macau.
So are they teaching this in Cantonese or Mandarin?
No, they're teaching in Mandarin, and no one in the school speaks Mandarin as a native language.
So you're all a bunch of dang foreigners.
And so I went to my very first fundamentals class from one of my favorite teachers. Is very kind, very, very organized, systematic teacher, so easier for me, who was originally her family was from Fuzhou, not Fujian, so Fuzhou Hua, not Xiamen Hua, and then grown up in Indonesia and gone to school in Yunnan. And she gave a lecture, and I didn't understand anything. And I was very, very distraught. Like, it's my first lecture, and I was studying Chinese at this point for 3-4 years, and I mentioned this to my classmates, and they said, "Oh, we don't understand her either. We'll figure it out." So, like, for example, again, this may not make sense this may just, you might want to cut this part out, but her sh and s and shi all sounded the same. So fei shu and fei shi, the last part sounded the same. And so the other students can't determine excess or deficiency.
So you can't determine excess or deficiency because it sounds exactly the same.
And so what the students figured out was to get her to speak an expanded language. So I don't remember what they were, unfortunately, but like they would use, for both of those words, she would use a bino. So maybe instead of saying fei shi, she'd say fei shi, right? So that meant excess. And for fei shu, this wasn't it, but something like fei kong shu. Okay, so that's deficiency. So a lot of the basic technical terms, we had to figure out a code, not only for me, but for everybody else.
For everybody else as well.
And then we had times in clinic. We had a very busy clinic. The clinic was great. And I remember once there was someone came from Hainan Island, and she spoke Hainanese. She had a translator from Hainanese into Cantonese, and then another translator from Cantonese into Mandarin, and then the teacher. And so the discussion would go back and forth. That was uncommon. But every so often we had refugees who were from northern China. I remember this one patient I was treated for a couple of years. I thought she was old at the time. She was probably 60. We called her Danyang because she was from northern China. And she spoke beautiful standard Mandarin.
What a relief. What a relief to hear standard.
I think I also did something maybe, a little like I would keep her there a few minutes longer when I did acupuncture stuff on her, just to listen to her talk. Yeah, so at the time, in terms of the profession, I'm not really thinking about, I'm not thinking, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to come back and do that. I'm not that kind of person. I just, I'm going to try and do this, and I'll keep doing it until I think, I have a certain level of competency. So
basically, you were interested, you followed your interest, you're not sure where it's going to take you. It took you to some very interesting places, that's for sure. But you weren't really thinking about, I'm going to go back and make a living as an acupuncturist. That was not running through your mind.
No. I mean, I don't think I was. I mean, it wasn't like I'm not going to do that. It's just I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I think that's right. Yeah, I had no idea when I would go back and what I would go back to, and I also had a jaundiced view of acupuncture in the U.S. For example, there was one group of people who were there was a magazine called East West Journal, which was like the big alternative medicine, New Age magazine of the 70s. And someone sent us a copy when we were in Macau, and there was a guy who was from England who was trying to take over acupuncture licensure, acupuncture in the U.S., and he had his curriculum, etc. He was trying to sell it. Of course, it didn't work because there are Chinese people in the United States. You can't. But the point important here is that he was saying, well, you should do this curriculum, not because it's mine, but because I'm adopting the curriculum of again, don't quote me. I mean, you can fact check me on the name. I may be wrong, but the name of the Chinese Acupuncture College of Hong Kong. So remember, China is completely closed at this point. It's the Cultural Revolution still going on, right? I have a funny story about that too. So, and so it's not my curriculum; it's their curriculum. Okay, and so like I go, wait a second, I've been to that place. It's like a 1,000 square foot clinic. It's got like 2 treatment rooms and an office. And for Westerners, the curriculum is, again, something like, $500 for a master's degree, $1,000 for a doctoral degree.
How much is it? What degree do you want?
Yeah, what degree do you want? So it's like, and I wrote this journal, like, something's off here. And they responded, that's not our problem. So that was my introduction to acupuncture in America. Like, they don't know anything and they don't care. So that didn't make me like, I better hightail it back to America soon and, get going. So I was not thinking, as far as I don't believe I was thinking about what my next step would be, because this step was a big deal, and taking all of my abilities to continue.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Yes. My God, I can remember sitting in clinics and, people would come in from other provinces and they would have such a thickly accented Mandarin, or maybe they weren't even speaking Mandarin. I don't know, because I could only understand every, 6th word or something. But, the teacher, the doctor seemed to know well enough what they were talking about, because they can kind of understand each other. Like, here in the States, you could be from Boston, but you can understand someone from Louisiana.
Most of the time.
Most of the time.
In the clinic, in our school, the vast majority of the patients, I believe, were also refugees. So they were also from all over and all sorts of different kinds of accents and languages. But that's why we spent a lot of time on pulse diagnosis.
School of Refugees.
Yeah. There was school. The auspices was the Macau Overseas Chinese Association. So they ran the clinic. And they ran the school.
How long did they last for? It sounds like it was something that might have responded to a critical moment in time. Did it continue, or did it fade away?
The organization and the clinics, I believe, still exist. And I know that one of my classmates was working in a clinic run by the same organization, in 2006. But the school only lasted, I think it was a 2-year program, and it basically closed after we graduated, because the main teachers had just come out of China before we started, and they realized, we're in Hong Kong, Macau. We want to make money. Let's go into real estate. So main teacher the guy who was the principal, went into real estate. There was later another school with the same name in Macau, Macau Institute, Alman Zhongyi Xueyuan, and Macau Institute, Chinese, but it has, as far as I know, no connection to the school that I went to.
So the principal and the teacher who wouldn't teach you, they went off into real estate.
I think they did quite well. It wasn't hard to do. If you had some basic capital, which they probably got from their relatives left in Indonesia. Well, I don't know anything, but I mean, they did. I heard that they did quite well. Also, his brother had written a pretty nice book on acupuncture. I think he also got into real estate. So that's, to my knowledge, that's what happened.
Okay. So, all right, Taiwan, Macau, you're following this stuff because you're interested in Chinese, and this is a really interesting aspect of Chinese life and culture, that's for sure. What comes next? Because eventually you did show up back here in the United States.
No, I did not. So after I finished my school, again, this is something that maybe you understand. So I thought, oh, well, I liked my teachers, but I know there are other really good teachers in Macau. And I had a couple friends of mine, and I had started an English night school. So that was a fairly easy way to make enough money to get by. So I thought that, I'll just stay.
So you started an English night school. You founded this night school. Yeah,
the Choi Go American Teachers English Night School. The main person behind it was John O'Connor, but it's long story. Yeah, so it wasn't. I mean, basically, it was like we rented rooms at the local Anglican school. Choi Go was the first Chinese convert to Anglicanism, and then people. And it's a long story. It's why people if people would study with us at night, partially because some people were interested in English, partially because even if you were a worker who worked in the knitting factory, if you had a certificate that your English was at a certain level, your pay went up. And also because in those days, if you were in your 20s and lived at home, you could not just go out and hang out with your friends at night. Your parents would not allow it. But you could go out and hang out with your friends and study English at night. That was okay. So, or other things.
And of course, you were tremendously qualified to teach English because you were white big nose.
Maybe not even that. I don't think it was even. I think you were just someone from America. I think if we were not white big nose, but we were American, or some people. I know people in the 70s who were Austrian who taught English, had very good English, but it's very heavily Austrian accented English. So it didn't take much in those days. And I think the reason in Taiwan, I worked at like the different bushiban, the different night schools, and because you were a foreigner, you got higher pay. But because Macau was a colony, if you wanted to teach in any kind of school, you wouldn't get higher pay just because you were a foreigner. And so we wanted to work as little as possible because we were studying there. We didn't want to, so we were able to, I'm not sure exactly, but probably 8-10 hours a week to make our, we weren't rich by any means, but we could pay our tuition and pay our rent and, have enough money to eat. Anything extra, we had to do extra kind of work, but that's pretty sweet, to work on 8-10 hours a week, and then you could study the rest of the time. So it was a good deal. So anyway, so I thought, okay, I'll stay here. And at this time, I had learned some Cantonese. I could certainly understand patients talking in Cantonese by and large. I couldn't necessarily communicate with them. So I thought, well, I'll stay here and I'll find another teacher to work with. But that didn't work because from my understanding, I was identified with the people at this school. And so why would someone else teach me? Because I'm identified with those people. Does that make sense to you? Right? It was like a factional, they weren't like, they didn't laugh at me. They didn't tell me, they were able to tell me, no, not why don't you give me $20,000 and I'll teach you. So I did that we realized at the time that wasn't going to work.
You know, Volker Scheid talks about this a bit in the book he did on the Muncher clan, about like you get into a certain group and now you're identified with that group. Like going outside that group, that's like rejecting your family.
Yeah. So, I'm a clueless Westerner, but and also I still don't look at things that way. I think that is not helpful to the development of any kind of craft or medicine. So I went back to Taiwan because I like Taiwan. And some things went well for me there and some things not so well. So I ended up doing acupuncture with this amazing practitioner, human being, kind person. Worked out really great for acupuncture. And I tried to find someone to do herbs with, because I think that those two worlds were separate enough that you would not be, and because nobody wanted me there all the time. So I had tried to do herbal medicine, and that was very hard for me. I don't remember why, but I remember in the end, I had to use a friend's father's connections from his home town or home county in Shanxi province to work with this really excellent herbalist. And so I had to use those connections to get in. He was one of those guys who could like hear the people coughing in the waiting room and know, oh, this is a version of Jerso-san, or this is, Beimugwalo-san, just by listening to the cough. And he was so busy that he had his own herb factory that he made his own formulas in powder form. And there were maybe 25 or 30 of them. I don't remember exactly. He made his own. So he would just give a number. You take number 16. And then, they would go outside and then they would go in, it'd be in the same building, and they get whatever amount of number 16. So it was vertically integrated, as they say. And my impression is he originally took me on because he thought having someone who looked like me hanging around would be good for his business. But again, this is just from my perspective. When he found out that I actually could learn, I knew something and could learn from him, he kind of flipped out.
Because you're going to take his secrets now. You know what number 16 is.
Yeah, it's one of those things, I don't understand it because, as you know, Michael, the chances of me going into competition with him in Taiwan was absolutely zero. It wasn't near zero, it was zero, right? Zero. So he would do things like he would lie to me about, oh, I'm giving this person number 16, and I'm just making, no, that sounds like that must be, San Xing Tang. You say, oh, no, it's, Yin Chao San, something like that. And I go, what? He said, you go look it up. And he looked it up, he meant the Yifang Jijia, which is a late 18th century text. It was the main formula text in Taiwan. And so after a while, even I figured out very quickly that something was wrong. And then so it was just like he would not tell me the truth about what was going on. And so the young women who made his herbs for him, I chatted them up over a couple of weeks. I do some ear acupuncture to help them lose some weight, that kind of stuff. But after a couple of weeks, it'd be like, oh, that number 16. And they would say, oh, you mean Sanxing Tang? Right? So I had absolute proof that he was screwing with me. So that was, again, at this point, I'm like, 23 or something. I've been in Asia a long, long time. For me, it feels like a long time. And it was like, oh, gosh. And as you understand, I couldn't confront him. That's not a possibility.
No. Of course not.
And I couldn't even quit precipitously because that would be bad for my friend's father who had introduced me. Right. So I had to tell him some lie. I think I told him, oh, I just got news that my elderly mother is ill, and so like next week I'm going to have to go back to America. And I just assiduously avoided that part of town the rest of the time. I was only in Taiwan for a few months afterwards anyway. But that was dispiriting to me. Like what do people want from me? I'm just trying to learn this stuff, again and again, as you know, I believe, but certainly from my own perspective, I am a person. I don't have secrets. I don't care what people have studied. If they want to learn something from me, I'm happy to teach them. And I think part of it is maybe just my personality in general, and partially is like these kind of experiences, like this is not good for the medicine. I would be a better practitioner, I'm sure, if this guy had taught me. And again, I don't think it was a thing like he was testing me. I told this to some Chinese people, and they said, oh, he was just testing you. And I can't say 100% that they're incorrect, but it didn't change for over a few weeks. He never, he would never tell me what was going on. He would never tell me the truth.
That was pretty clever to connect with the herb Xiaojie and get straight scoop.
It was like, because again, I just graduated from school. It's like, no, that can't. And I go back and do the things, and it just didn't make sense at all. So it was either something was very wrong, and it was either him or me, and I didn't have any way to check on me. But I had a way to check on him, right? And so, but I can't describe how dispiriting and how, like, what am I doing? Like, I'm just trying to learn this stuff, again, you have to think about, this is 1975, maybe early 76. It's not like, again, as you were talking about earlier, it's not like, oh, a dad's going to go back and make $1 million. I mean, the herb line in the United States with my stuff. But so I have no idea what he was thinking, to be honest. But it was like, I can't deal with this. So
now, somewhere in all of this, there's a book that comes out. You and John O'Connor.
Yeah. So John O'Connor was in Macau at the same time as us. He had originally come because he wanted to translate modern Chinese literature. And he got interested in acupuncture to a degree and did some study. He didn't go to our school, but he went to Hong Kong to do some studying in a school there. And so he's, was into translating, which I was not at that. And right before he left in 1975, the book that we translated as the Acupuncture Comprehensive Text, it's just called Zhenjiu Xue in Chinese, came out from Shanghai. In the 60s, maybe right before the Cultural Revolution, I'm not sure, the Shanghai school had put out a 3-volume text, 3-volume text on acupuncture. And this was their revision in a 1-volume book. And so John said, oh, we should translate this book into English. And I said, right, yeah, sure. But somehow, I don't know how he talked me into it. And so we did that in our spare time over the next 5 or 6 years. So, and John came back, he got a master's in Asian studies, and then he went to law school. And I came back, I left Asia in 76. I spent some time mostly in Japan, a little bit in Korea before I came home. And I went back to finish college. I hadn't finished university. So I finished college, and then I ended up going to medical school. And in that period of time, and so my degree from University of Michigan is in Chinese language and literature. So I got some help from some of my professors there on this book that was noted in the preface. And so we had this book translated in by 1980, so about 5 years later, and then it came out in 81.
That's right about the time that schools were just beginning to happen in the States, isn't it?
Earlier than that. So the first licensure, I believe, of acupuncture or Chinese medicine in the U.S. was in California. And I don't know when it started. I believe I got my license there, I believe in 78
This is California?
in California. So I was excited. Again, for me, like, oh, you get a license. You know, if there's a license anywhere in the U.S., I have to get it. So I was able to qualify and pass the exam, that part wasn't too difficult for me.
You probably had to take the test. Did you take the test in Chinese?
I had to take the test in Chinese.
I bet you understood it better in Chinese than English.
Well, I didn't know the point numbers. So they said, no, spleen 6. I go, yeah. Oh, so I had to do that. And again, given that my studies were, in TCM, the only thing I had to study for the test were the 5 face points, because I had learned them, in a very perfunctory manner. And I don't think anyone I worked with, except a couple of the people in Japan, ever used those point groupings in a serious way. So I took it in Chinese, which is an oral test, and so it worked out easy for me because that Chinese was okay in those days. I just come back, and they were the opposite of the people in Asia. You can speak Chinese, you're in. No. They asked me all the questions, and I got some. I mean, I didn't get them all right for sure, but once I started talking to them in Chinese, I wasn't worried about. They were not there to keep me out. They were there like, oh, Huaning, welcome. So that was actually.
That was a surprise, huh?
Not so much. In outside of Asia, I don't know about you, the response, particularly this is 45 years ago, when people heard you speak passable Mandarin, they were usually friendly.
I found people to be friendly, especially in Taiwan.
Yeah. I mean, again, most people in Taiwan were very friendly to me, and but the thing about the Baosho, it's translated as conservatism, but it's this kind of holding on to secrets, right? And maybe that's what Baosho really means, is something that is very harmful to the development of Chinese medicine. So in general, not just my own story.
So you've had all this experience in Asia, and what a wild ride that was. And now you're back in the States, late 70s, early 80s. You get yourself a license in California because you can get one. Then what happens?
So anyway, in terms of school, I think the first school was actually the New England school. I think it predates by a few months or a year the first schools in California. So there are a few schools starting in the late 70s. And California Acupuncture College, and what was the one? There was a big one in L.A. What's it called? I can't remember what the name was. That all went. They have a thing, as you know, lots of acupuncture schools get too big, and then they collapse because they can't keep up the thing. So SAMRA, SAMRA, which is a acronym. I don't know what they all mean, but SAMRA was not a word. It was the S, though, S something, A something, M. That also started very early. And I think the San Francisco Acupuncture College also started fairly early. Yeah, so that started maybe a year after. So NISA must have started in 77 maybe, or 76, because it had been open, and then Ted Kapchuk came back and he started teaching there. The original teacher was Dr. So, was quite a talented and interesting human being, but then Ted started teaching there. So I think that must be the oldest extant Chinese medical school.
So in these early days, the schools are just beginning, you're back. Do you have a plan for yourself? Do you have a sense of where you're going or how you might want to use this stuff, or you just still kind of running on this Bensky navigation of next interesting thing?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm back in Ann Arbor, finishing up my undergraduate degree, treating people, completely illegally, but not the, I don't know, a few people, 3 to 5 people a week, maybe, in my garret, literally a garret. But I had some amazing learning experiences. So, for example, my training, like most TCM training, I think till today, is that you use acupuncture for musculoskeletal things in general, maybe 1 or 2 digestive exceptions, maybe a couple gynecology, but mostly pain, right? Mostly around pain. And then you use herbs for everything else. And that was my training. That's what I think the woman, the acupuncturist I studied with in Taiwan, her practice was not that different than the kinds of people we had seen in the acupuncture clinic in Macau. And so, but I had getting herbs in Ann Arbor, Michigan in 1976 is a problem. You could do it. You could get Suntian herbs. And I think there was also a really good herbalist named Guo in Chicago. You could order herbs from him. But, you would see the patient and then you order the herbs and the herbs would come like a week later, right? That's suboptimal. And I had a patient with some kind of genetic disorder where she had low levels of some kind, I'm blanking on the name, but immune issues. So she had to take lots of gamma globulin all the time. And she got sick all the time. So she came to see me and the herb just didn't work out. So I treated her with acupuncture and she got much, much better. I mean, she's one of my favorite things ever. After I treated her, probably in those days, I think I treated people once a week. And maybe after a month, she came in to see me. She's quite steamed. And she said, Dan, you told me that acupuncture doesn't really have side effects. And I said, well, yeah, that's basically, what's up? She said, well, I developed insomnia. I'm waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning every day and I can't get back to sleep. So, okay, well, and I went through, it turned out like she wasn't tired any other time of the day. She was alert all the time. And then I said, it took me maybe 5 minutes of like, well, this, what? I said, well, what time do you go to sleep? She goes, well, I go to sleep at 8. I said, why? I said, well, because I need 12 hours of sleep because that's who I am. And it's like, maybe not. Maybe you only need 8 hours of sleep. And you could almost literally see, actually, she could probably see it in me also, but the light bulb's going off like, oh, my body's working better. I don't need 12 hours of sleep anymore. But because she had been this congenital issue, it had not occurred to her that was the problem. So the light bulb going off at me is like, this acupuncture stuff really works, right? I would never, ever, based on my training in East Asia, have treated her with acupuncture. But I just had to do what I could do. So that was and I kept in touch with her for quite a few years. She did quite fine. Until we lost touch. But and she didn't need acupuncture. Again, one thing about acupuncture is, as you know, like you get to a certain point, the body takes over. Even this kind of body with its own glitches, and it's fine. So yeah, so I'm just working in my garret. I'm working on this translation. I'm not really thinking about my next steps. And then my own personal journey has nothing to do with the greater acupuncture journey of acupuncture in the U.S. is just by chance I read something about osteopathy and acupuncture that I found very intriguing. So again, as you can see, and I say, oh, that osteopathic stuff, that looks interesting. And so I go see a local practitioner who turns out to be the only one, but I just found him in the, young people won't know what this is, but the yellow pages. I looked in the yellow pages and I saw this guy, and he did mainstream family medicine osteopathic manipulation and a kind of background acupuncture called ryodoraku, which is you would take the electrical impedance of the Jing well points, and based on what those showed up, you would then do certain acupuncture points as a way of balancing the body. So it's a kind of meridian therapy, but instead of the pulse, you would measure the electrical impedance of these points. So this looked pretty cool. I said, okay, I'll do that. And so then I went to osteopathic school, and again, I had some great. You'll decide what's useful and what's not. I had developed what I call a sojourner's mentality when I was in Asia. And that means I'm here, I'm basically a guest of these people. I should learn what they have to teach me and make as little waves as possible. I'm not here to inform them or enlighten them or even necessarily share with them what they're not interested in. I'm here to just kind of move through, absorb what I can from them, and fit in as best I can, which sometimes is not that well. And so when I went to osteopathic school, which is very, I don't know, by and large the same as MD school, I worked in hospitals and ERs and all those things. I was just there to do that stuff and to learn that stuff. I wasn't there to, teach them the errors of their ways. But one of the really amazing people I worked with was a cardiologist in the hospital I did my internship in, and he was interested in everything. He's an incredibly brilliant person and generous person, and so he's asked me, "Well, is acupuncture any good for coronary artery disease?" And I had treated some people with very mild, problems, and it seemed to help them. I said, yeah, it's pretty useful. It can be useful. I said, well, I have some patients for you. That I want you to see? I said, okay, well, what's the criteria? He said, well, they've all had 2 bypass surgeries that failed. They're on maximum medications, and they come into the ER in out of control chest pain at least twice a month. I said, Dr. Rogers, no, that's not really my criteria for acupuncture. But he said, well, if I have you treat these patients, no one will criticize me, right? We're doing everything we can. And so we don't have options. And actually for probably, there were about 15, 18 patients. Over half of them stopped coming to the ER. I treat them every couple weeks. And a few of them made really big improvements in their activities of daily living. They could go upstairs. I don't think anyone decreased their medications, but it was I was impressed. Everyone was impressed. So that was, but again, I didn't have extra time for this, and I ended up I had a chance to stay in that hospital and work after I finished, but I ended up going to Boston instead. So that's just one of those decisions.
Dan, you had a promising career in acupuncture cardiology.
I did. But it just, as you might understand, I'm from Detroit. It was like, I think it's time to get out, to move on to a different environment. So I think it may have been a big mistake, actually. Of course, the other thing that made me not want to do that is, of course, it's still one of those things that the mainstream doctors, they couldn't deal with herbs. That's like a no-go. And so I would not have been able to do any herbs. That's something that I was not willing to forego in my practice.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner. Because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi. And that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
But even the acupuncture itself, it is weird stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very weird. I think that's why it's so enjoyable. You just see like, wow, this. And again, it's like it's not the acupuncture that's amazing, but the human body and the world is amazing. And again, as something you mentioned in the very beginning, it's just evidence that the world is not like we think it is. It's not as simple as we are taught. It's very clear. And again, I think that's some of the resistance to acupuncture, to be quite honest, because it's not a question of this therapy being useful, but if this therapy is useful, we have to rethink some other things too that maybe most people don't want to think about. Certainly most people in positions of authority in medicine don't want to think about.
Well, fair enough on that. As humans, as a human, looking at my own life experience, once I think I have something kind of understood, kind of dialed in, modicum of skill, capacity to make some money or capacity to be helpful, right? Any of those things, kind of understand it, feel a sense of confidence. Hanging out with uncertainty isn't so pleasant unless you've acquired a weird taste for uncertainty. And that's not most of us.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I mean, I'm actually the opposite. Someone mentioned about me many years ago, like uncertainty is uncertainty, but when I feel very certain, I'm very uncomfortable. Like, oh, something is wrong.
Just waiting for the hammer to come down, right?
Yeah, and it's only a matter of time.
I hear you, my friend. There is that. I've had this strange thing lately. I've been doing this almost 25 years now, which is weird. Like fives and zeros make me pause and stop and look and consider. And for the longest time, I've tried to normalize acupuncture, be able to explain it in Western ways or be able to explain it in the common parlance in some way. And I would say in the past 6 months, I've finally come to the conclusion that acupuncture is weird. And I'm perfectly fine with it now. It's taken me this long to get to the place where it's like, this stuff is weird. And it really requires a different set of tools for navigation and conceptualization, or sometimes just dropping conceptualization, being able to just pay attention to what's there in the moment. And it's very, very strange stuff. And I find that it's getting stranger the longer I do it. It's not getting more systematized, or it's becoming stranger the longer I do it.
Yeah, I think for me, Michael, talking to people, I think it's important to communicate with them, but I have found most useful is to communicate with them on the basis of experience, not on the basis of theories, both in terms of, don't talk about gate theories or neurological theories or even yin-yang theories. Just if you communicate, it's an experiential, it makes sense to almost everyone experientially, which is probably where the medicine came from, right? And yeah, I think trying to convince people on some basis of some, I mean, I understand. Like in the 70s, I was super into research personally. And there was a period of time when I'm quite confident I had read every article researching the acupuncture in Chinese and English, not other languages. And I had a realization that this wasn't, it was interesting. And I think in the end, again, you talk about, again, I'm a small person, not a big person, right? So for the growth of acupuncture in the world, this stuff is important. And this should be, in general, if it's done well, which is a big issue, and I'll give you my joke about that in a second. But for me personally, it wasn't helping me with my patients, and I couldn't see a way in which it would. And so it wasn't a sudden thing, but over the course of a couple of years, I realized I wasn't reading so much. I wasn't that interested. Because the research issue is like the joke. I'm going to tell the story anyway. A joke of a guy walking down the street at night and he sees someone on their hands and knees underneath a streetlight. And he's obviously looking for something. And gets down. He's a nice, passerby is a nice guy, gets down and, says to him, what's going on? So the guy's a little inebriated and says, man, I lost my keys. I'm looking for my keys. And so the passerby gets down and on his hands and knees and looks around for a few minutes and doesn't see any keys there. And so he says to the guy, you lost your keys here? And the guy says, no, man, I lost them in that alley over there. So you lost them in the alley over there. Why are you looking here? He said, man, the light's much better here. And so I think sometimes the keys to what we do are in the alley. They're dark. It's dirty. There's probably needles of different kinds there. It's maybe a little dangerous. So it's not easy. You're not going to go in and just pick them up. But if you look in under the streetlight, you'll never find them. That came to be my, again, one of my simplistic ways of thinking. That's my metaphor. Like, you want to find the keys to acupuncture, you got to go where acupuncture is. And it's not where the lights of present day science are shining.
When I first went to acupuncture school, I was so glad that there appeared to be, like I said earlier in this conversation, there appeared to be a profession, there appeared to be schools, there's a way of learning, there's a path forward. Other people have walked this path. There's accreditation from organizations that accredit these things to say this, this is a real school and you can learn. And I'm glad that I had all of that when I started, because if I knew at the beginning I needed to head down the dark alley, I would have never jumped in. Wouldn't have done it. Like, no flipping way. Like, no, I wouldn't. But there's so much that I found in my life, and grateful for this. I had no idea what would be asked of me or required at the beginning. And that's always been helpful, because by the time you get in it up to your neck, well, okay, now you're kind of used to it.
Right. And also I think our work is really good for us. I mean, again, from my osteopathic medical days, the people I know who stayed in mainstream medicine as a group, not all individuals, over time became more judgmental and liked people less. And the people in our work, if they do the work in any reasonable way, over time you become less judgmental and you like people more because you are engaging with them in a real way. You're not reducing them to something you can see on a screen. And I'm, as you know, Michael, by nature, I'm extremely judgmental human being, but I'm significantly less judgmental than I used to be just from doing the work. So I think it's one of the side benefits. And so again, it's also this understanding as you doing something that seems wacky to you and works, that does something really beneficial for your brain, right? Or your mind. It's like, okay, I really don't know what's going on, and maybe don't need to. I just need to, like, patients used to always ask me whether they had to believe in what I did for it to work. And I always said, you don't have to believe. In fact, I don't have to believe in it. I just have to do it correctly, and it will work. And I'm very clear on that. I've done things that at the time I thought, this is wacky stuff. But I don't know what else. Might as well try it and have really, amazing. I'm sure everybody who does acupuncture has this kind of experience that the belief is not important. And, we have to work in a way we have some idea what we're doing, and we need some constraints. I think that's like any art or any skill, working within constraints enables you to do it better than working without constraints. And so I think that's why, one of my favorite sayings is, theory is very important in practice, in theory. But it's both of those things. It is important, but you have to make sure that you don't take it super seriously, because then you will box yourself in. I don't care what the theory is. It's going to be, if you take it too seriously, it will box you in, which is okay, I guess, but to the detriment of your patients, which is not okay. So
I have found over time that when I have the thought, well, according to the theory, that's when I know I'm lost. I've lost the scent of the trail. Whatever it was that I was following in a way that seemed sensible, it's gone. According to the theory means start again.
Yeah, according to theory means, well, let's try that and see what happens.
Yeah, you could do that too, but I found more often than not, when I rely on theory and what I'm supposed to do with that, at this point, it's a marker for me that I need to resettle myself and pay attention differently, because those treatments never work. They just, at this point they don't. But that's just where I'm at with that. Yeah, it keeps you present.
It's one of those, what do you call it, yin yang type of things. I don't know.
Well, they always say it comes back to that, and I reckon it does, but there's the 10,000 things in between, and that's where it gets interesting. Well, Laos,
well, we didn't do much history.
We did some history. Yeah, we did. There's so many different streams that make up what I'm going to put under the rubric of Chinese medicine, no, I can't say Oriental medicine, whatever we're calling it this week. There's so many streams that come into it, and so many influences.
Yeah, I think to me, the stream about how it got legalized, how it spread, how they pulled off this kind of bootstrap thing, right, of making up their own organizations and getting them accredited. And again, the fact that, in 1976, it was illegal everywhere in the U.S., basically 75. And now it's legal everywhere. That's a fascinating and important story that I just happen to not know anything about. But I think those people, there's a lot of amazing people that worked really, because, again, if you ask me, like, if I came back, when I came back in 76, would you think, oh yeah, in 30 years, there'll be 50 acupuncture schools and it will be legal. It'll be, insurance will pay for it in many states. It might even get Medicare. I would have just laughed my head off. Like, oh, that's not in the cards. So I didn't know anything. That hasn't changed.
Bootstrap, I think, is a good way to say it. I've had a number of other folks on this series. In fact, if you've been listening to the series, you probably heard them already. There was an incredible bootstrap moment, and there was an incredible moment of people. They were just kind of like you, Dan. They were following something that caught their attention. They couldn't not follow it. And partly what happened as they moved forward was meeting other people also doing this. Like, how do we take this forward? And there was a real pivotal moment where things kind of coalesced. And a profession was created by people who just stepped in, did not know where it was going to go, but knew that something needed to happen. And we're going to start with some of the basics that we know. Let's get some schools. Let's get some accreditation. Let's get a licensure. And to get the licensure, you need to have the states be able to go, well, you prove that you've got a standard. Okay, we get a standardized test. And then there's a profession. Yeah, but it was all created by people not unlike you that were following something that didn't yet exist.
I mean, maybe the last thing I want to talk about, if it's okay, is that, because you asked, like, what is it like to become an acupuncturist, right? And I did this, I don't know, it was maybe before or after, it must have been after your time, but I used to do a little 5-minute talk at the Siam graduations. And I thought about this issue one time, and I realized that for me, and again, this is more to give people the sense they can do what they want on a certain level. For me, I didn't, when I started doing this, think I want to become someone who does East Asian medicine. I didn't think, oh, I want to be like these people I study with in Asia, because the ecology is completely different. And I didn't think, oh, I want to be like a Western doctor, because that medicine is completely different. And the metaphor for me was becoming like a jazz musician, and that I had to know my chords and my progressions and do my scales. And then instead of the difference being jazz is a creative expression of who the people are, and East Asian medicine is a creative response to who people are. Right, so you're not there to express yourself, you're there to respond in a creative way, knowing your different scales and everything to your patients. And at the time I thought that this is honest, heartfelt, and blah, blah, blah. But I thought afterwards, like, that was probably not the most appropriate thing to tell these people just graduating. But the reason I bring it up here is that two of the people who were in that class many, many years later, like when they were leaving the Seattle area, wrote to me and said that idea, not so much to be like a jazz musician, but that we are still in this period where they could look at doing East Asian medicine in a way that suited them, or they had the leeway to not fit into a straitjacket of what it should be, had made a big impact, a positive impact on their own practices.
Well, that piece about it not being a creative expression of who we are, that brings a lot of ego in, which can cause all kinds of trouble. To think of it in terms of a creative response to the patient, that's a great place to start with any clinical encounter. Creative response to the person in front of me. Probably a good place to put a pin in it for today.
I think so. Thanks for inviting me, as always, letting me join on, as is my want.
Thanks, Dan. It's been fun.
You take care.
Yeah, ni bao zong. Had it not been for Dan getting sick with something that did not respond to Western medicine, we wouldn't have the same foundational books that we rely on today. Dan's interest in Chinese, it led him to Taiwan, and having some herbs effectively change a troublesome illness, that aimed his curiosity at Chinese medicine. It's never a straightforward path when you're following your curiosity, and that's not a problem. That's an opportunity, and worth remembering the next time that you set your heart on not just knowing about something, but looking to understand it. Whenever I listen to Dan, I am reminded that there are no pat answers, that the world is fluid, ever-changing, and being able to recognize when you're wrong with a shrug and a smile, to have the capacity to take a topic seriously, but not take yourself too seriously. So you can approach your learning with a sense of being linghua, with being lively and flexible. It goes a long way. And it goes a long way because we are not looking for answers, but rather understanding. That, it takes some cultivation and a spirit that is as happy to get a yes as a no, as you turn information into knowledge and then distill knowledge into wisdom. Well, friends, this wraps up our History Month here at Geological. I hope that you have enjoyed and gained an appreciation for some of the people who were there at the beginning and then kept moving forward along a path that, it turns out, they blazed. Of course, there is much more to the story, or perhaps better said, stories of Chinese medicine's emergence into the mainstream cultures of the West. So do expect to hear more stories from time to time on those who were here in the beginning as our trade was finding its way into the everyday lives of those of us who live here in the West.
Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Geological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Geological.